On our 4,552-mile, 16-day, 15-night Tesla road trip, where we drove through 7 states from Utah out to the Midwest and back, I recorded time lapses of all the major drives throughout the trip. When I edited the trip video, I decided to split out these time lapses into their own standalone video at their normal speed. They are included in the main trip video, but super sped up. If you'd like to see that video, click on the card above and I'll put a link to it in the description of this video as well. I still used some pieces of these videos here and there as it made sense to, but ultimately mostly they went unused in that video due to the video running long. My method of making these time lapses was to hang my Sony a6600 camera with a suction cup from the glass ceiling of our Tesla. I set the camera to interval shooting mode, which takes a picture automatically every set amount of time, which I set to every 5 seconds. These pictures were captured in RAW format, which I then imported into Adobe Lightroom and batch edited them, darkening the light areas and lightening the dark areas, which is like HDR or high dynamic range pictures, but from one high-bit picture so that you can simultaneously see out the windshield to the bright outside, plus you can see the dark interior and dashboard screens. All of my other cameras do not have the dynamic range and bit depth to be able to do this. I then import those pictures into Adobe After Effects and create a movie out of them, playing back those pictures at 30 frames per second. And that's the video you're seeing now. Personally, I really like how these time lapses through the windshield of the car illustrate the type of terrain we're driving through, combined with all of the information on the displays of our 2015 Tesla Model S. I'm a data guy and I geek out about being able to see all this information. Whenever I drive our Ford F-250, which is nearly exclusively when we're on trips with our RV, I am regularly reminded at how little information legacy vehicles provide. For instance, the gas gauge in the truck is an analog dial that I can see roughly how much gas is remaining, but not very precisely, and the amount remaining is not consistent. Versus the Tesla that gives me exactly how much power is remaining to 1% increments. At least the truck does have a readout of estimated miles remaining, and it seems to be somewhat accurate. The reality for gas vehicles, though, is that there are gas stations everywhere, so how many miles of range remain is not terribly important, because gas can be acquired in so many locations. I recommend watching this on as large a display as you have available and in 4K resolution, so that you can see all of the details, such as the battery's state of charge on the far left side of the screen. Another key data point I keep my eye on throughout all of these drives is the estimated arrival percentage, and I adjust my driving depending on that number. Generally, we target arriving at the next charger with 10% remaining, and if the car begins to lower that number, then I slow down correspondingly to ensure it stays above 5%. Sometimes it goes above 10%, and that simply allows me to drive faster, depending on the road conditions, of course. On this particular trip, the weather was varying degrees of windy throughout, so our efficiency was bad. However, on trips of high speed for long periods of time, the efficiency is rarely over 80%, and typically it's closer to 75%. I averaged the efficiency percentage of all of the substantial drives through this entire 4,452-mile trip, of which there were 41 drives, and the average was 74.67% efficiency. That's driving at freeway speeds around 80 miles per hour. Our Model S is rated to use 300 watt-hours per mile in mixed city and highway driving. If it hadn't been so windy, it could have been a couple percent higher, most likely. You can see how quickly time is passing by watching the clock in the top right corner of the center display. I also find the consumption graph interesting to watch, as it clearly demonstrates the amount of power being consumed, which isn't clear just by looking out the windshield, since cameras don't accurately display how steep the terrain is, nor can you see the wind. Pay attention to the average watt-hour per mile consumption number on the left side of that graph, and note the solid gray bar is indicated at 300 watt-hours per mile, and the dotted gray line is the average on that graph, which I leave at 30 miles the entire trip. On the right side of the graph, it projects the miles that you could drive at that rate of consumption with how much energy is left in the battery. I don't pay much attention to that number, since the future terrain can potentially be quite different from the past. When the graph turns green, that shows that regen braking is adding energy into the battery while we're going downhill, and when it's orange, it's energy going out of the battery, which obviously is the majority of the time. Most of the regen braking shows up on the graph when we're in the mountain states going downhill for a long enough period of time for it to average into the negative consumption numbers. The estimated arrival percentage takes into consideration the topography of the route to be driven through, so it's far more accurate and it's a simple number to pay attention to instead of the projected miles of range remaining. Also, the outside ambient temperatures come into play due to the vehicle's heating and cooling system having to compensate. This screen never shows what our set point for the cabin temperature is, but we mostly keep it around 70 degrees Fahrenheit. You can barely see the outside temperature on the right edge of the steering wheel. When we are charging, the car estimates how many more minutes we need to be there for, and we've often found it to be a little on the low side, likely because the battery management system lowers our charge speed faster than it used to, and perhaps that's not calculated into the time calculation. On this trip, we also had a chronic tendency to take a long time getting back into the car to continue on our way, so we weren't charging and driving as efficiently as we could have if we had left more quickly, since the charge rate lowers the more charged the battery gets. Another reason why this trip wasn't very efficient is due to the extreme wind, which caused me to charge longer to gain a larger safety margin than I normally do. While we're charging, pay attention to the kilowatt charge rate and number of added kilowatt hours along the bottom of the center display. The charge rate is much higher in the new Teslas, which peak at 250 kilowatts and can sustain a much higher charge rate for a longer period of time before beginning to taper off. The majority of this trip is on freeways with multiple lanes and high speed limits, so we're able to keep our speed more consistently high. On highways, where there's only one lane, typically we'll get stuck behind someone going slow, and that helps our efficiency but increases our drive time. If we pass them, then typically that lowers efficiency pretty badly because there's a huge spike in energy consumption in order to pass them quickly when there's a gap in oncoming vehicles. There was very little of that type of passing on this trip though. The vast majority of all of these drives, I have the traffic-aware cruise control enabled and usually the auto steer as well. You can usually see the auto steer icon, which is a solid blue circle on the edge of the steering wheel. It's not always visible though, since the camera moves just a little bit throughout the trip and the steering wheel isn't perfectly round. Auto steer and traffic-aware cruise control combined are what is referred to as autopilot. And keep in mind, ours is version 1 from the company Mobileye that Tesla partnered with back when our car was made. We don't get any software updates related to autopilot since Tesla has taken that development in-house and our hardware is not compatible with their newer software. Autopilot is a wonderful feature to have on long road trips like this, and I can't give it enough praise. I drove the entire trip except for one 2-hour, 137-mile morning segment early on in the trip in Colorado when Jessica drove. Tesla's version of autopilot has newer features that we don't have, but for the base functionality that ours does have, it's more consistently reliable than Tesla's software is at this point. We have no problems with phantom braking, for instance. One limitation is on hilly roads, of which there are many in Missouri. As the vehicle is cresting the top of the hill, the camera can't see where the lanes are going and tends to freak out and jerk side to side. So on that type of road, I typically just turn off auto steer, but I leave the traffic-aware cruise control on. What also makes driving this vehicle on road trips a pleasure is the ample power, allowing the driver to better navigate traffic where power is helpful. There are some points in these videos where the video jumps forward, and those are when the camera stops for whatever reason. I generally got it back recording again quickly, so the jumps are not typically for very long. Occasionally the screens turn black. That happens after about 30 minutes of inactivity in the car. Generally, we are doing things that kept the screens on, or I was present and turned them back on quickly by touching the center display. But occasionally I didn't catch it very quickly, so it's noticeable in the time lapse. Also, in order to keep these screens on, we had to leave a door ajar, otherwise these screens turn off when all the doors are closed. The charging sessions not shown in these videos is when we're charging at someone's house or at the hotel, and that's simply because these charges last for a long time and are happening when we're not waiting, so the length of time isn't important, and the charge rate stays consistent until the battery state of charge gets above, say, around 95% typically, since home charges were typically at 6 kilowatts. If you'd like to know the details of the drive and charging stats as well as the total cost for the entire trip, then go to the other video I've left a link of in the video description, and it's all outlined there. One thing I did forget to mention though is we did offer to pay for the electricity that we consumed at all of the homes that we charged at, and everyone just said, hey, thanks for coming and visiting us, and definitely no need to pay us for the electricity and come visit again. If you have any questions, post them in the comments below and I'll answer them the best I can. I'm just going to play some music for the rest of this video, and I hope it's helpful to be able to see these details. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.